everyone, and a very warm welcome to our harness workshop today. We're so thrilled to have you joining us. And for those of you that it's your first time, you're brand new to harness, welcome, welcome. A little bit about harness. Harness makes it easier for people to support the causes they care about and allows nonprofits to better reach donors, making more change possible. We have three main drivers. We believe in cultivating a new generation. We believe in stewardship at scale, and we believe in driving repeat gifts. We'll talk a little more about harness at the end, so stay tuned. A little bit about this workshop and future workshops. Our upcoming Harness Academy will be home to all of our workshops, our webinars, and hold the tools needed for our harness community, which is you guys. In the meantime, if you're interested in this topic or similar topics, just head to blogs.harnessgiving.com, where you'll find a range of content designed to empower nonprofits like you to better steward your donors into lifelong supporters. Okay, now that we got some formalities out of the way, it's nice to meet you guys. My name is Simone. I am Director of Marketing here at Harness Giving, and your host today from sunny Tampa, Florida. In today's webinar, we're going to be exploring how to establish a working ED board relationship. We have an incredible speaker here today and with an incredible story. I can't wait for her to share it with you guys. But before we get into this topic and introduce our speakers, let's do some introductions and go over some housekeeping. Go ahead and use the chat to introduce yourself, tell us where you're listening in from, and your organization, and what about this topic brought you here today. While we get some introductions, I'll go over some quick housekeeping for today's session. So please use the Q&A to ask questions. We will have time at the end for a live Q&A. Just so you know, all attendees can upvote. If you see a question asked and that you have as well, click that thumbs up button to bring your question to the top of the Q&A window. All attendees can also answer questions or leave a comment on questions being asked. Number two, comment and use emojis in the chat because we love engagement. Okay, so what I'm going to do my intro later after you log off. So everything's recording. I'll start the webinar and then just take it away, okay? Okay. Hold on. I also have to make sure you have permission to share. Can you share your screen?
Let's see. And that's where we got in trouble before.
I also made sure it shares on the cloud regardless of who that.
Okay, give me a second because now I'm not seeing the button to share. Okay, here, share. And slideshow from beginning. And okay, perfect. You see notes or slideshow?
Slideshow. So
okay, perfect.
You'll see the broadcast has started. I'm just going to turn my camera off, okay?
Okay. Okay, so this webinar has started and so good. I'd like to talk about today, we're talking about how to establish a good ED board relationship. But before we get into that, I just want to say a little bit about me. And so I studied political science and public administration. I obtained a nonprofit management certification from Harvard Business School. And for the last 25 years, I've worked in nonprofit organizations. I've worked in direct services. I've worked in operations. I've worked in executive leadership. And in 2018, I was diagnosed with cancer and I decided I was going to retire. And then since then, I've been helping nonprofits and small businesses build relationships that convert into increased revenue. Now, people always ask me why I leave the cancer diagnosis in there. And I always tell them it is the whole reason why I started my company. It is because I don't want people stressing out. I was one of those. I was stressed out. I was overwhelmed sometimes, and overworked oftentimes. And so as I was getting my stem cell transplant, I had 30 days, y'all. Stem cell, you stay in the hospital for 30 days. And I said, I don't want anyone else to have to go through this. And so I created my company, and through my company, I provide a lot of low cost, oftentimes free services, but quality service. And what I do is I do workshops, I do board retreats, I do webinars, I do coaching, and I do consulting. You can visit my website at www.supportingworldhope.com to see the different services that I offer. And while you're there, sign up for my VIP free resource library. I have many documents in there that's going to help you on this journey, so you don't have to go down the Google rabbit hole. But we're here today to talk about board and staff partnerships. And I want to start off by saying that board and staff partnerships are designed relationships rather than haphazardous. That means you have to spend some time thinking about how you're going to move forward with this relationship and put that effort and time into it. And so today, I want to let you know that effective board staff relationship, it starts with common expectations. It starts with cooperative planning, open and honest communication, and mutual respect and evaluations. And so common expectations is very key. So what does common expectations even mean? How do you start talking about how we plan together? How do you establish this open, honest communication? We're going to talk about that as we get into this presentation. And so let's really talk about the 3 requirements for an effective partnership. It's going to require clarity of roles. It's going to require division of labor and attention to the working relationship. And attention to that working relationship is key. All of these are key, but where I see people oftentimes drop the ball is the attention to the working relationship, because you don't pay attention to that, and that starts to create some of those clarity questions. And so we're going to get into that and share that information with you. And so as we move through this presentation, I get excited about it. So let's start off by saying, what is the role of the CEO and the executive director? Do you know your role? Well, your role is to be the visionary for the organization, and you are the chief relationship builder. And that chief relationship building component doesn't stop with the donor. It includes your board of directors. It includes your board chairs. So you have to have that hat on at all times when you're dealing with your board, if you're going to create this effective partnership. The CEO, they manage the operational activities, and they're the gatekeeper to the staff. The CEO is the gatekeeper to the staff. That's going to be very critical, and we're going to touch on this point throughout this presentation. And the CEO has the role of in developing the board of directors as well. They also have that role, and we're going to talk about that. The board chair, what does a board chair do? So if you're a board chair, the board chair needs to be approachable. They need to be available. They need to be a strategist. They need to be knowledgeable about the organization, and they need to be knowledgeable of board practices, best board practices. They need to be a coach. They need to be respected in the community. And the chair is the gatekeeper for the rest of the board. And so when you do this tag, you're it mentality for the board chair, you're doing a disservice to the person that is going to serve in that board chair capacity, and you're doing a disservice to the organization. And so you really need to put a thought into who's going to be the board chair? And do they reflect these characteristics that you need to have a good board chair? And so that board chair, they really serve as the contact, the point of contact for every board member on board issues. They are in charge of the board. They set the goals and the expectations and the objectives for the boards and ensure that they're met. They ensure that all board members are involved in committee activities, assign committee chairs. They motivate board members to attend meetings. They find their successor, right? So they help find their successor. They put that system in place. They facilitate board meetings. So if you're a CEO and you're doing all the talking in that board meeting, then I'm going to tell you right now that that is not what you're supposed to be doing. Okay. So one of the trickiest responsibility of a chair is to run an effective and productive board meeting. So again, it is the chair that's running that board meeting, not the CEO. If the CEO is doing all the talking, is that really a board meeting, right? And so you need to make sure as a board chair that you have a system in place to create a purposeful agenda, and it's in collaboration with the CEO, and that you follow that agenda. You need to know how to run a productive meeting. You need to know how to engage each board member in their fiduciary responsibility around within this meeting. You need to make sure that you control anyone who's trying to dominate the meeting or is out of line in their behavior during the meeting. So this is the role of a board chair in facilitating a great board meeting. I'm going to share with you something. When I took over my organization, now I took over this organization that had been run by someone for 30 years, pretty much the founder of the organization. And she was great. I learned so much from her. I'll speak her name. Her name is Mary A. Flores. I love speaking people's names who've had an impact on me. But one of the things, because I was a part of her succession plan, and I knew that I would eventually hold that CEO position, I looked at things and I said, you know, these are some of the things that she was fabulous at, she did great at, and here's some of the things that I want to change. And one of the things that I wanted to change was I wanted the board meeting to be the board's meeting. So oftentimes, she was the only one that spoke in the meetings. And also, not only was she the only one that spoke in the meetings, she also prepared the agenda itself. So that was immediately one of the things that I wanted to change. And so in changing that, the system that I went to was our executive committee wanted to get them involved in creating the agenda along with the board chair. And so I brought this to the board. And a lot of times, guys, you're just going to have to initiate these conversations. And so I brought it to the board and I said, you know, the way we do coming up with the agenda, myself coming up with the agenda, it really doesn't inspire engagement. It's the conversation that I had with the board chair. You know, I think, you know, it's a board meeting. And so the board needs to be a part of coming up with the agenda. So had that conversation. And so the board chair and the executive committee bought into it. And so they set up a system in which we did a board agenda. So be careful what you ask for, guys, because I'm not a morning person, but I was committed to this process, right? And so the only way that they could do this was via having an early morning meeting. And so once a month, I would have a 7 a.m. meeting with the executive committee. And what I did was I bought a draft of the agenda of the things that I wanted to make sure that we talked about. And then we reviewed that agenda. They added the things that needed to be added. And we walked out of that meeting with a final agenda. And so having those engagement moments with the board to make sure they are part of that process is going to be golden, because that's going to increase your engagement. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, if the board chair is not able to lead an effective meeting, it is better to delegate that task to someone else, maybe a vice chair. But rather than risk having an unproductive, boring meeting. We've all been in those meetings that you didn't want to be there. And you've served on that board. You're like, why do I even come to these meetings? And maybe that's why you're having an attendance issue, because you don't have these systems in place. And so what does a board of director do? Or what does board members do? Well, your board, I love a board. I love board of directors, because I understand that they are your force multipliers. That means you as a CEO, you can't be everywhere all the time. And neither do you have influence in all the areas in the community that is required to run a successful organization. And so you identify good board members who will lend their credibility to the organization in the area that they represent. So what does that mean? You need to have someone from marketing. You need to have someone from the medical field. You need to have someone from the legal field. These are all different areas that can, or the banking industry. These are all different areas that you may not have influence in your community. And so you go out and you seek to find people in the community that have good leadership reputations, and they lend their credibility to the organization and their influence to the organization. And so your board and board members, they're your force multipliers. And that's why it's so critical for you to consider who comes onto the board. And then if you're lucky enough to have a development director, I will tell you right up front, ran my organization for 20 years. I did not have a development director to the last 5 years. And the first one, y'all, I ran off because I was used to doing everything myself. So I had to learn some hard lessons by the time I bought the second one in. But if you're lucky enough to have a development director, their job is to coordinate all of that, right? They are the behind the scenes person. They are preparing the board and the executive director to meet with the donor. And so every team member has a role, and it's an important role. Again, the executive director is the visionary, and they're the chief building officer. They're the public face of the organization. The board chair ensures all board members are involved. Board members bring credibility in their relationships, and then the development director helps coordinate all of these moving parts. And one person cannot and should not be expected to play all those distinct roles. So in summary, when is the executive director in charge, or the CEO, depending on the title you use? I'm going to use CEO throughout this presentation, right? But they are in charge when it comes to staff hiring, management, and supervision. If the board chair is stepping into these places, they are micromanaging and overstepping their boundaries. And not only that, you are at risk of demoralizing your executive director or your CEO. And so who gets hired, how they are managed and evaluated, and whether they stay or go is the job of the CEO, period. So can a board chair have some concerns about who you hire? Yes, they can. And they can direct those concerns to the CEO. But can they fire that person? No. The ED, the CEO, is responsible for that. And that's any board member. I'm saying board chair, but that's any board member. right? Take your concerns to the CEO. That is not your job. Because if you're doing that, you're overstepping your boundaries. What else is the CEO responsible for or in charge of? They're in charge of managing the budget. They need to be on top of the numbers at all times. Even if there is a director of finance, they should understand what the numbers are saying. They need to be able to anticipate challenges, communicate them in a timely fashion, and in a way that all board members can understand. They also need to bring the strategic plan to life. The executive director, the CEO, needs to develop and execute a set of annual goals aligned with the strategic plan, especially around program design, execution, and success. So how do you do this? I always go into these hows, and I like to share hows because people can say what you need to do, but they don't say the how. You get kind of lost in that, right? And so one of the things that are best practices, a presentation to the board at the start of each year and an explanation on how these goals will help achieve the overall goals of the plan is essential. And then then you let the board know how. And you have to come up with how you operationalize these goals. And so you notice some key words when I talk about what is the executive director, the CEO in charge of. And those key words are they're in charge of hiring, they're in charge of evaluating, they're in charge of managing and operationalizing. And so in summary, that is what they're in charge of. So then you say, then what is the board chair in charge of, right? So the board chair is in charge when this is going on. They hire and evaluate the executive director or the CEO. That's what the board chair does. So board chairs can often, try to swoop in and supervise rather than provide oversight. But really, that becomes a problem because it gives the board little opportunity to evaluate the executive director's performance. And so really the only staff that a board has is the executive director or the CEO. That is your only staff. And so with that in mind, you need to make sure that you are evaluating that CEO. Now, I live in the real world. Remember, I told you I did this for 20 plus years. Oftentimes, you as a CEO, you have to prompt that conversation. And so when I first became the CEO, remember I was part of a succession plan. When I first became the CEO, my expectation was that I was going to get an evaluation. Well, year one, I didn't get an evaluation. Here comes year two, no evaluation. I don't know if you can tell about me. I'm really goal oriented. So I need to know what you're measuring me by. And so I had to initiate that. So what I did was I had a standing meeting with my board chair and I told him about the evaluation and we really need to get this started. I'm getting concerned. And so what I did was in that conversation, I said, here's the evaluation, my self-evaluation. Here it is. What I would like for you to do is to review this evaluation, make any changes that you feel as board chair. But also I need you to get the input of the executive board. Allow them opportunity to make any changes and additions. And then discuss this with the full board so I can get a final evaluation and know what my goals are. And so I had to initiate that. And oftentimes you will find as a executive director that you need to initiate this. This is what a strong ED does. And so keep that in mind. And then two, What is a board chair in charge of? They're in charge of approving the strategy. So the board chair must ensure that there is a solid process in place and lead the board to approve a strategy that makes sense and can be owned and championed by all leaders in the organization. They also approve the annual budget. So it's not the sole responsibility of the chair, but they have to provide clear direction to the finance committee to create a process that has integrity and to ensure that the board members have what they need to make informed decisions as they vote. So again, I tell you, I live in the real world, did this for years. And so you as a strong CEO, you have to initiate this. And so how do you initiate it, you say? And so what I would do and what I found out worked was I started as the CEO with my budget. Here is what my budget is. This is what I want. I know we need a new vehicle. Let me put that in the budget. I know I want to increase staff. Let me put that in the budget. Here is what I want. Here is my budget. Reasonable. Present that to the finance committee. Finance committee, we delve in, we go over this. What's realistic? How are we going to get there? Are we going to increase, are we going to add a grant? Are we going to add not add a special event, but are we going to increase the revenue? What our goal is for this revenue that the board is in charge of? How are we going to get there? Once we flesh that out, then that final budget is then taken to the full board for approval. So again, you notice, live in the real world. I had to initiate that as a strong CEO. And why am I initiating these things? Because I'm the paid person of this organization. Board members are busy. They have their full-time jobs. Our organization is not their world, right? And so keep that in mind. And then the board chair has to build a strong and accountable board. The board chair is the coach of the board team, and they're responsible for making sure that everyone plays by the rules on their team, right? Holding them accountable, making sure they attend meetings, making sure they serve on committees, making sure they're participating in fundraising. And so how does the board chair make sure that happens? Well, again, strong CEO. Hey, I notice, Susie's not coming to the meetings. According to our bylaws, if she missed 3 meetings, we have the opportunity to vote her out. This is conversations that I had with my board chair when we met monthly. And so I would say, peer to peer, you need to have a conversation with them and check in on them. Maybe, things changed at work, or maybe things changed with their family, but that's a conversation you need to have with them and say, hey, we really need you there because we need to establish quorum. And we see that you have missed the last couple of meetings. Does this board service still fit in your life? And so they have those conversations peer to peer. But you as a strong CEO, when you're meeting with your board chair, you bring up these topics and you discuss how you want to handle this. How you want to handle a specific situation. So keep that in mind. But there's always trouble, right? So here's where the trouble starts. And here's a great example. And so this is the executive director. And I love it because I can visualize the bubbles popping up and all that. And so the executive director is saying, I'm having a hard time with Sarah. Now, Sarah's an employee. And who's in charge of the employees? It's the executive director, right? So they say, I'm having a hard time with Sarah. I really think it might be time to let her go. And so the board chair has what they really think floating above their head. And they say, what's been taking you so long? What you been waiting for? Sarah is incompetent and scorching the earth. But we can't say that because we're mature. We're a mature board person. And so the response should be, I have seen some evidence that she is a challenge. Happy to offer some input if you like. What do you need? You leave it open. It's optional. What do you need? And here's what I have thought as the ED. I thought, and this is my balloon right above my head, what my initial thought is I really want to know, but I sure don't want my board chair in my staffing decisions. I would love to have your opinion, but I ain't crossing that gray line. I don't want you in my business like that, right? That's what initially thinks in your head. But the mature response is going to be, thanks. Your input would be helpful as I decide. And you notice by this language, the mature language, it is co-pilots working together. It is the language of partners. But there are still, even when you have that in place, there's still a few gray areas that are not so black and white. So let's talk about some of those gray areas. And so there are 4 of them. There's board composition. The executive director has to be involved in board composition in terms of defining what skills are needed on the board, what attributes. They should have the right of veto. And I had that right of veto. If someone, the board, here's the skill set, here's the composition that we need, and they found someone that they really thought held that. But if I knew something about them, I could easily say to my board, because we built that respect and trust, I don't think they will be a good fit. And so they allowed me that informal veto power. And then also the gray areas is finding great board members. As the CEO, I was out there in the community as well, did mixers, did leadership classes, served on this and that. And I met some great people, right? And so I always had that hat on, and my other board members always had that hat on. And so I could bring names to the nomination committee and say, I think they will make a great board member. I would like to submit their name as a part of the nomination process so they can go through that process. And so having that, and then strategy development. The executive director and the board chair, you got to be in sync when it comes to strategy direction. You need to be on the same page, because this is the way that the venue or the avenue in which you are taking the organization. So you have to be in sync on that. And then board engagement and board meetings. Board meetings are not necessary evils. Board meetings are great time to engage the board. That is the time where you can, enrich and inform and engage board members so that they are ignited to invite other folks to join the board. And so you as the CEO in this gray area, right? Yes, you talk at the board meetings, but you don't talk throughout the board meeting. It is a board meeting. It is your board members who should be doing most of the talking, but you're there, to make sure that the intentions are aligned with the advancement of the organization. You're there to make sure that you can answer questions. You're there to make sure that it's a proper agenda and that they got it in a timely manner, and that the atmosphere is right and all those things. And we'll get into that. And so those are some of the gray areas. But it is, even though there's gray areas, it is essential to have clarity of roles, because that's essential in building trust. And it's the lack of clarity that makes nonprofits less effective. And so the relationship between the board chair, and the executive director is critical. In fact, I often say that this relationship is the single most critical sign of a healthy nonprofit. That's how important it is. And so the board is authorized by the state and by the supporters. And the executive director, CEO, is authorized by the board. That's what it is, point blank. But you need to have a partnership. And a partnership is negotiated and developed with mutual respect for each other's roles and responsibilities. And so a partnership requires open communication again, regular meetings, willingness to work on each other. It requires reflectiveness. It requires benefit from regular communication and systematic feedback and assessment. And as your organization grows, you may have to redefine that partnership. So if you are a founder in a founding organization, right, that may look very different from a organization that's been around for a while. And so keep that in mind. You have that partnership, but that partnership can evolve over time, but it does need to start off as a partnership. And so for my founders, if you're there and the only time you're talking to your board chair is, I don't know, haphazardly, then that's not the right call. You need to set up a formal process where you're engaging them, where you're talking to them, where they are aware of what's going on in your organization, and that's going to build a true partnership. And we'll talk about that as we get into some of those roles. But at the end of the day, where I've seen the most trouble is around who is employed by who. And so I'm going to say this again. The board has only one employee, and that's the executive director and the CEO. And the executive director, the CEO, has all the rest of the staff. So let's get into this division of responsibility. So mission. So the board of directors approves the mission, the vision, values, and the strategic plan. The executive director works with the board to develop the mission, the vision, the values, and the strategic plan. So right off the top, let me give you an example, right? So are you capable of writing a mission statement and a vision statement? You are capable of doing that. And a lot of you, especially founders, will do it. And they just present it to the board and say, here it is. This is our mission. This is our vision. That's not how it works. What you do is, yeah, you write it up as a draft. Hopefully you go through a whole strategic planning process and you get somebody to come in and help you do this. But let's say you don't. You come up with your mission and your vision. And the next step is to get input from your board. Here is what I've come up with, or we've come up with. I would love to have your feedback on this, right? And hopefully they give you some feedback. Some may not give you feedback, and that's okay. Where you're creating is opportunity for engagement. And so always lead with the thought of creating opportunity for engagement for your board. So keep that in mind. Now, under the mission, the board reviews and approves annual implementation plan to ensure consistency with the strategic plan. And the executive director develops annual implementation plan and advises the board when the milestones in implementation are reached. The board ensures legal and ethical integrity. The board maintains accountability, including complying with reporting and accounting requirements. And the board's aware of key risks and mitigating strategies. So you notice there's nothing corresponding on the executive director side. You need to know that as the board. It is your role to ensure legal and ethical integrity. So if you're a board that's leaving everything up to the CEO, you're not doing your job in ensuring legal and ethical integrity. It's okay for you to question. And executive directors, you do need to provide that information to your board. You need to be open and transparent through all of this, okay? So let's talk about the money. The board of directors approve the annual budget. The executive director develops the annual budget, establish income and expenses parameters, determine which specific expenditures within approved budget lines are used. So let's talk about that, because this is one of my soapbox issues. Let me say this right now. So your board, they approve an annual budget. And so let's take the office supply line item, for example. So let's say your board approves the annual budget and they give you $10,000 for office supplies. Then that's their role. They gave you $10,000 for office supplies. You as the executive director do not have to come back to the board and say, okay, of this $10,000, I want you to approve this $200 expenditure from Staples so I can buy staplers. No, that's not, you don't have to do that. The board approves the budget. You determine the specific expenditures within those line items. Now, there may be some things where when we talk about policies, and we're going to continue to talk about that, over certain amounts that you have to go back and get approval for. But getting approval for $50 to spend on paper clips is not one of those things. Okay. I want you to hear me on this, because I've seen too many boards and people do this. So money, you have to approve the internal control policies. That's what the board does. And the executive director works with the board to develop financial policies and internal controls. The board hires the financial auditor, and the executive director responds to the auditor's findings. The board reviews financial indicators and ensures adjustments are made. And the executive director, you report to the board on cash flow, on budgets to actual, and other key financial measures. So executive directors, you're not doing your job if you don't provide an updated monthly financial statement to your board. And board, you're not doing your job if you don't review that. Now, does it have to be talk about it in the board meeting? It doesn't have to be. It can go on consent agenda if your finances are in place. But the point is the information needs to be provided. The board approves investment policies and ensures compliance with regulatory requirements. And the executive director complies with board approved financial policies and reporting requirements. So this is where those financial policies come in place. This is where procurement policies come in place. This is where you approve that budget and it says I have $10,000 for office supplies. I don't have to come back to you on how to spend $250. Now, you may have in the procurement policies, if you want to spend $5,000 or more at one time at one vendor, that I need to come back to you for approval, right? Those are the different examples. Let's take travel for one. So the board may approve travel and conferences, professional development at $5,000. Well, if I want to go to a conference or pay for coaching that costs $2,000 or even $500, I don't need to go back to the board for approval of that, because you've approved the $5,000, right? So this is how I'm going to spend that $5,000. And the only time I would need to go back to you is if I wanted to spend all $5,000 on one person, one opportunity, because that's what's in our procurement policy that the board has approved. So if you don't have any procurement policies, that's the first thing you need to jump on and get these policies and processes in place. And that is what the board does. And then the board supports fundraising activities. What does that mean? That means that the board needs to give financially to the organization, because one, it shows your commitment to the organization. It makes you a better fundraiser. And then number three, is hypocritical for you to go out and ask people to invest in an organization financially that you're not investing in an organization financially. And I do not get into that debate of board members not being able to give their treasure. I believe that board members, as family of the organization, either give their time, talent, and treasure, period. How much? That's a discussion for your board. But all three components need to be there in order to be a board member. And if you don't want to do that, then you will make a great committee member. And that's what I have to say about that. And then the executive director works with the board to develop and execute a fundraising strategy. That means if we say we're going to do a special event, then they get the ball rolling for that. They help with the marketing. They help with the news, all of those different components to make it successful. And then with the program, the board of directors ensures the programs are achieving the objectives, and the executive director develops the program and implements the program, and they provide evidence of program effectiveness. And then on people, right? Again, here it is again. It's so important. I put it in here again. The board of directors hires and evaluates the executive director and the CEO, and the executive director hire and supervise all other staff. The board of directors approve personnel policies and review salary information, but the executive director, the CEO, sets compensation and benefits for individual employees within organizational policies. That's where the board exercises that control, by having organizational policies and developing those policies. And then the board of directors, they're responsible for drafting the grievance and whistleblower policies. And I will say the reason why is because maybe someone wanted to blow the whistle on the executive director, right? And so you need to really board take ownership of that. And so it requires attention to a working relationship. And working relationships, you have to build those relationships based on trust, respect, communication, appreciation, mutual goals, because trust is the air we breathe. When it's present, nobody really notices, but when it's absent, everybody notices. And so you have to build your relationship on trust. And the board chair and the executive directors, you have to focus on building trust. And I will point this out to my executive director, CEOs, you have to also have board champions. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the board chair. And that is a board champion, a person that several people, 1 or 2, 3, that serve on the board, that you are in alignment with, that they will voice the things that you may not be able to voice as the CEO. They're your champion. You want to get something done, you share that idea with them, and they bring it forth to the board, or they bring it forth to the board chair and ease that way for you. So make sure you identify some good board champions. And then the relationship between the executive director and the board chair, again, it's a partnership, and it needs to have constant attention. And so there are some things that you need to do to make sure that you're paying attention to that relationship. And that's making sure that you have face-to-face meetings with your board chair. You designate a time each month that you're going to meet with them. I would go to lunch every month with my board chair. Every month we sat down, we broke bread together. We talked about what was important to me, what was important to him or her. We talked about these things. And I did not just leave it at that designated meeting time. Sometimes I would pop up in their office and just do a little quick informal check-in, see how they was doing. The whole point is to build a relationship with them. And not only did I do that with my board chair, those pop-in visits and all that, I did that with every single board member, especially my board champions. My board champions, I probably ate with them at least once a week because I really wanted to have a great relationship with them. So you got to keep that in mind. And here's a little message to my boards out there that I want to make sure that you hear. Oftentimes CEOs and executive directors, they're going to complain that their boards don't get it. I've even done that, and I have a great board. But sometimes I would say they just don't get it. But you got to bring the board closer to you and make sure that they trust you, and you have to engage them. And it's okay for board members to ask questions, but we want them to ask the questions, and I'm talking to my board members out there, ask them at the right time, not reopen everything, because that's frustrating for CEOs and executive directors. And it's debilitating to the group, coming to the meeting, talking about the same thing over and over again. Didn't we hash this out at the last board meeting? Didn't we talk about this before? And so keep that in mind. But at the same time, it's okay. It's okay to ask questions. The point is to be challenging and productive. The point is to be a help to staff, but it is not to look for errors that the staff is making, right? And so a tips on good board member and executive director communication is going to be running efficient, focused, and collaborative board meetings, encouraging interactions outside of the boardroom. I can't encourage that enough. Again, I would go to lunch with my board members outside of the boardroom. I encourage my board members to get to know each other outside of the boardroom, and they often did. We had meetings in board members' homes, like committee meetings. So all of these things are encouraged. And you as a CEO, you need to evaluate your communication strategy. Some board members want to be communicated with via text. Some want to be email. Some of them may want you to pick up the phone and call them, but you have to figure that out and understand that some friction is normal. The executive director or CEO will always gripe about some of the things the board does or say. I've done it myself. And the board will always feel that there are things that they would do differently if they were running things. And that's okay. In moderation, this is okay. It's not unusual, nor is it undesirable. Regular managed discussions on issues with representation from both sides can be very productive. However, if there are issues that aren't being resolved, the first thing to do is to invite those involved for a cup of coffee together and see if you can work it out. But at the end of the day, it's about communication, communication, communication. And so really quick here, I want to go over this checklist and make sure we have it, that the supportive board, what does that look like? That means board members can do their job. They show up for board meetings prepared to participate in the work of the board. And their first priority is governance and fundraising, not program level work. And board members should not make more work for the staff. So I'm going to say, if you have a great idea, that's a great idea. I'm going to need help executing that idea. So just don't throw these ideas out and not be willing to pitch in to make these ideas a reality. And board members can show appreciation. Show appreciation to your executive director, your CEO. Recognize their birthdays, their marriages, and other big life events. I'll tell you right here, every year my board member got me a designer purse because a purse is a way to my heart. And I have a closet full of designer purses because of my board members. That was their way of showing appreciation to me. They understood my love language. And my love language was gifts. And they got me designer purses and I appreciated it. And boards can be advocates, right? Board members can advocate for the nonprofit and their clients within their own networks. That is key. They can write letters to elected officials. They can attend legislative council sessions. They can attend community meetings, mixers, all of that, and make sure that the attendees know that they are a proud board member of this organization. So be an advocate. That's how you can be supportive. And then an executive director can be supportive to the board by giving the board some prominence. Are they listed on the letterhead or on the website? Do you have a swearing in when they come on board? Or it's just you here now and there's no swearing in. You didn't invite, the board chair can swear in the board member, or if you want to make it more formal, you can have an attorney or a judge come in and swear in the board member. Are you doing a news release, announcing that this person has joined your board of directors? Are they featured in the newsletter or on social media? These are the things you can do to show support to your board. Another thing that the executive director and CEO can do is appreciate their board members as well. Steward them, cultivate them, find out when their birthday is, about their marriages and big life events, and show that appreciation. Send them a birthday card on their birthday, things like that, these little things. And so with that, that's my presentation. If you have any questions, I am more than willing to answer those questions.
Okay, so much information in so much good information in such a short time. Thank you, Sabrina, so much for that presentation. Now, if anyone in the audience has questions, now is the time to ask. Go ahead and use the Q&A to ask your questions. Let's see. Here, a little GIF for you guys. If you're in the Zoom webinar, there's also an upvote feature that I mentioned earlier. If you're watching on Facebook Live, add your questions as a comment. That does conclude our Facebook Live stream. So see you soon. Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our Harness workshop today. We're so thrilled to have you joining us. And for those of you that it's your first time, you're brand new to Harness, welcome, welcome. Harness, a little bit about Harness. Harness makes it easier for people to support the causes they care about and allows nonprofits to better reach donors, making more change possible. We have three main drivers. We believe in cultivating a new generation. We believe in stewardship at scale, and we believe in driving repeat gifts. We'll talk a little more about Harness at the end, so stay tuned. A little bit about this workshop and future workshops. Our upcoming Harness Academy will be home to all of our workshops, our webinars, and hold the tools needed for our Harness community, which is you guys. In the meantime, if you're interested in this topic or similar topics, just head to blogs.harnessgiving.com, where you'll find a range of content designed to empower nonprofits like you to better steward your donors into lifelong supporters. Okay, now that we got some formalities out of the way, it's nice to meet you guys. My name is Simone. I am Director of Marketing here at Harness Giving, and your host today from sunny Tampa, Florida. In today's webinar, we're going to be exploring how to establish a working ED board relationship. We have an incredible speaker here today and with an incredible story. I can't wait for her to share it with you guys. But before we get into this topic and introduce our speakers, let's do some introductions and go over some housekeeping. Go ahead and use the chat to introduce yourself, tell us where you're listening in from and your organization, and what about this topic brought you here today. While we get some introductions, I'll go over some quick housekeeping for today's session. So please use the Q&A to ask questions. We will have time at the end for a live Q&A. Just so you know, all attendees can upvote. If you see a question asked and that you have as well, click that thumbs up button to bring your question to the top of the Q&A window. All attendees can also answer questions or leave a comment on questions being asked. Number two, comment and use emojis in the chat because we love engagement. We want to know that you're loving the presentation. Three, please be respectful and kind in the chat. We are all here on the same mission. And four, if you're just logging in, go ahead and introduce yourself, drop your name and organization in the chat to kick off, and let us know where you're tuning in from. Okay, so now join me in welcoming our board engagement expert, Sabrina Walker-Hernandez. She is president and CEO of Supporting World Hope. Fun fact that I just learned, Supporting World Hope shares the same initials as her name. How fun is that? With over 25 years of experience in nonprofit management, fundraising, and leadership, Sabrina provides consulting services and provides and project-based leadership in helping organizations in the areas of building and managing development programs, capital campaigns, major gifts fundraising, board development, marketing, annual fundraising efforts, and public relations, and that list goes on. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sabrina to the stage. Sabrina, welcome. We're so glad to have you here.